Good morning and welcome to the Point. Legislators in Washington and in Lansing are taking some time off around the Easter holiday. Some are back in their districts talking to constituents. U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow came to Grand Rapids this past week. She talked about a new prescription drug plan and also about that new spending bill, where she says there is some good news for West Michigan and the Great Lakes. Senator, earlier this week, you introduced a new package to deal with prescription drugs. And before we get into the real heart of that, I think it's important, it's instructive for us to understand this impacts every single person in this country, if not on the planet, because in some fashion, we pay a cost for the cost of prescription drugs, even if we aren't taking that drug.
No question about it. It's the biggest driver on the increase of healthcare. If you talk to any hospital CEO, if you talk to doctors, if you talk to pharmacists, this is the biggest thing that they can't control in terms of their costs. And it's driving up everything. And it's getting worse rather than better. And what's frustrating to me is that we as taxpayers invest in the research, the basic research through the National Institute of Health, all good. We do all the basic research. The companies take that and then add to it. They can write off their research and then they develop medications and so on. But there's no sense of responsibility, since this is a partnership with the taxpayers, to make sure the prices are affordable. I mean, I believe healthcare is a basic human right, including the cost of medicine. And the drug companies look at this as a commodity to go to the highest price the market will bear. So if more people really need something, the price goes up rather than going down, which is really outrageous. And so when you look at the system right now, it's really pretty rigged against people who need medicine. And so I've introduced three different bills. And one came to me from Michigan pharmacists, and I had no idea that right now a lot of the contracts they are required to sign to sell prescription drugs say that they can't tell somebody who shows up at the counter to get their medication that they could actually pay less out of pocket if they paid cash than if they used the copay of their insurance. So somebody comes in and maybe they have a $20 or $30 copay, but they could get it for $5 if it was cash. They're not allowed to tell them. And the pharmacists who want to help people be able to afford their medicine, particularly when the copays are much, much higher than that, are very upset. So I've introduced a bill with Susan Collins, bipartisan bill. We have good bipartisan support that basically just says you have the right to know the lowest price when you go to the counter, and the drug companies should not be able to do what they call gag clauses.
Let me interrupt you for just a minute, because what you just said takes me aback, and there are a lot of people watching this morning that are saying, whoa, she did not just say that.
I know.
So if I have insurance and I give you my prescription drug card and I have a $20 copay, presumably my insurance company is also paying something on that.
Sure.
But if I pay out of pocket, it's less than my copay, and my insurance company's not involved. So part of the question is, why do I have that insurance?
Well, one of the challenges right now is there's a bunch of middlemen that it's called PBMs, the benefit managers, that manage all this between the insurance companies and the pharmacies and so on. They get the cut. So pharmacists have said to me, okay, if your copay is $20 and I could give it to you for cash for $5, they don't get the extra $15. The middlemen get the extra $15. That's why I'm saying this is a rigged system. And on top of that, then we have two other things that affect the fact that prices are so high. One, Medicare is not allowed legally to negotiate a group price for seniors. The VA negotiates on behalf of veterans. They get about a 40% discount because it's a good price. But Medicare, who negotiates on behalf of all the seniors and people with disabilities, can't do that. And so you say, well, why is that? Well, back when Medicare Part D was passed, and by the way, there's some 1,400 special pharmaceutical lobbyists today, over 1,400. There are only 100 senators, so there's 14 lobbyists for every one senator. They all ascend on to Congress, and they get legislation and language put in saying you can't negotiate the best price. Then we can't allow our pharmacists or our hospitals in West Michigan to be able to do business with Canadian operations because of something else they got in the law. We trade everything across the border. We bring auto parts across the border every day.
We bring trash across the border.
We bring everything across the border. You can't do business on prescription drugs. And so what happens there? Again, you go to the other side, the Canadian side is 40% on average, 40% less than on the Michigan side. So we've got a system rigged that a lot of high-paid lobbyists, who, by the way, spend a lot of time making sure they just got a great big tax cut, and they just gave $50 billion back to their CEOs and big investors in their pocket, didn't use a dime of that to lower the cost of prescription drugs. So people have got to get organized, get loud, and push back, and that's what I'm in the process of doing right now, because this is about life-saving medicine. This is not something that's optional for people, and too many people literally are cutting pills in half or not eating to get their medicine, or taking medicine they're supposed to take every day and they're taking it 3 times a week. And so this is really a very, very bad situation, and we need to all get together and say it's enough. We're not going to do it anymore.
I get the lobbyist. I understand that they have a job. And by the way, people, when they hear lobbyist, it's a dirty word, but every single entity, to some degree, has someone lobbying in Washington. But here's the question. When it comes to something as fundamental as prescription drugs, and I set it up at the beginning of the show saying this impacts all of us, because it certainly does, the kind of carve-outs that you're talking about seem almost nonsensical to somebody like me, and I'm not completely unaware of what happens in Washington, but that seems like a bridge too far. But is that the only way they could get to the 60 votes at the time? Was that the whole idea?
Well, on Medicare, I mean, this was a situation where there was just heavy lobbying from prescription drug companies. I actually, because this has been such a big issue for me, the cost of medicine for a long time, I actually, because they blocked negotiating the best price, I didn't end up voting for that bill, because I saw it as a giveaway to the drug companies, but not something that was actually going to help people to be able to get better medicine. I mean, Medicare would just pay more, so everybody in Medicare would be paying more, but they wouldn't be getting the best price. So I've been concerned for a long time. Now, I will say we've made a little bit of movement on the question of reimportation of prescription drugs. I used to take seniors on buses across to Canada. I've done that a number of times to demonstrate the difference in price. The FDA now has finally determined that if someone is personally bringing back up to 90 days of their own medicine, that they will not stop people from doing that. But the bigger issue there is West Michigan pharmacies or hospitals being able to do business. I can remember the president of Michigan State University, Peter McPherson, back when he was president, calling me and saying, I'd like to be able to do business for our medical schools and be able to get a better price on medicine. They tell me I can't do that. I want to do it with a firm in Canada, and they tell me that's against the law. Why is that against the law? So it's a situation that really has been tailored to stop competition and to be able to create a situation where prices are higher than they should be and people don't have a choice. I mean, if you have cancer and you're told that you need a particular medicine, you're in a very tough spot. You either have to pay what they charge or try to figure out what else you're going to do. I mean, this is, I think in this country, this is pretty outrageous. We're at a point now where, because it's even going higher and higher and higher and higher. Talked to a woman yesterday who had her medicine go up 500% in the last 3 months. This is just not okay.
This is not your first rodeo. As you point out, there are 14 lobbyists that could well be assigned to your office. It doesn't work exactly that way, but I guess I question as I sit here what you think the realistic possibility of this happening, given that they will put on a full court press.
They will. Well, the good news is that on the bill that we have, Susan Collins and I have, we've got good bipartisan support to simply say the pharmacist can tell you the lowest price that you can pay. I mean, that ought to be obvious, and I know there'll be pushback, but I think we can get that one done. The other two, because they really go to the core of competition with Medicare and reimportation, we've not gotten the bipartisan support we need. And so that's going to be harder to do. But this is what I know today. I know after watching the fight around health care and rolling back Healthy Michigan and Medicaid for seniors in nursing homes and so on, everybody rose up and said, wait a minute, my health care is personal, it's not political. And by rising up, we stopped a complete unraveling of the entire healthcare system. So that can happen. I mean, there's more than 1,400 people that care about this issue. And so if people get engaged, and I encourage people, go to my website. I'd love to have people share their stories if they're willing to let me read their stories on the Senate floor. That was extremely helpful when we pushed back on healthcare and when we saved community health centers and the Children's Health Insurance Program. It's because people leaned in. And I believe if we do that, because it's so personal and so basic for people, that we can actually see change.
We've got 60 seconds left. I hate to change the subject, but a budget deal was agreed to recently. It expires 5 weeks before the election, right, even though there are numbers in place, right, for the next year. Are we going to come down to the fall and have another one of those push and shove kind of matches?
Well, I don't know. I hope not. I mean, one of the basics is to get the budget done, and I'd love to see it done. I will say we had some great wins for Michigan, saving all the Great Lakes money, adding some language on Asian carp, putting money in to dredge our recreational harbors so we can take our great boats out this year and be able to have harbors dredged. And we were able to get a health study in on PFAS, which is a subject for a whole nother time, the very, very serious issue around health. And we were able to get funding for a very important health study. So a number of things that relate to Michigan, a lot of good things related to protecting our water.
When Senator Stabenow heads back to Washington, part of the conversation there may center around gun control and school safety. That conversation will continue both in D.C. and in Lansing, and we will follow that for you, and we'll be back with more To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. In Lansing, lawmakers will get back in session in a week or so, and when they do, they may have a limited amount of time to get things done. We sat down to talk with Republican Representative Aaron Miller. Representative, this next quarter may be the best chance to get something substantive done during this legislative season. And I've been talking to a number of your colleagues, and they have a number of things they'd like to accomplish. What do you want to work on when the in-district period is over, you're back in the swing of things?
Well, I suppose I'm a little bit different. You made a good point. This is, so to speak, we are even coming up to the fourth quarter as it pertains to our legislative session. Most people would think of it as lame duck, but really as far as getting things done, that time is really drawing nigh, and anything you want to get done, it's time is now, not 3 months from now. So you make a good point about time drawing short. For me, I have fewer legislative hang-ups that I really want done than maybe some others. I definitely don't come to work every day thinking I want to get my stuff done for my purpose or this and that. Most of the bills I've introduced have been constituent bills, something that comes up, and I definitely introduce on the low end, on the low number as far as bills go. But as a legislature from a broad sense, I would like to see us, since we're coming up on an election year, since these deadlines are approaching, I would like us to take a look at all kinds of laws from front to back and make sure what we have in law right now is a good thing. If not, change it. Let's repeal the bad, change the good to better. But as it pertains to what I want to do, I have been working on a couple things. As elections chair, I have been working for almost a year and a half now on elections issues and have enjoyed it thoroughly. And one of the proud things that is now in the past that I enjoyed working on, and I think it's a good issue, I believe in it, was online voter registration. That's just one example of something that I worked on and wanted to see come to fruition. 38 states do it, and Michigan was an anomaly along with the other 11. And I'm glad to see that's changing. We're going to advance that good legislation. I, of course,
Let me
sure.
stop you right there,
Sure,
because
sure.
I want to dive into that a little bit, because I've talked to a couple of other legislators about it, and there's quite a bit of broad-based support in terms of doing registration online, but there are still those that are wary of exactly what that looks like and how much that opens up the certified voter file to fraud. Because I know one of the questions was when Secretary of State Ruth Johnson took over, there were a lot of people on the file who had moved out of state,
Sure.
died or whatever, and so there were actually more people registered than there were people who could vote. So what kind of safeguards are built into that?
It's a great question. There are really elections law, the election system is a collection of layers. There is no one safeguard, and this surprises people sometimes. There is no one safeguard that does it. It is our multi-layered system that protects against widespread fraud. You would have to tap into many different local municipalities, obviously, to change an election here in Michigan because we are a decentralized system. But as far as registrations, a lot of people don't know that if somebody moves away, in cases where there is not a red flag that goes up from another state and our state is talking with that state, that person will stay on our voter rolls for 2 presidential elections, and they're just there. They're called the inactive file. But technically, that person could come back and vote. If the states aren't properly talking, you've got a problem. And so there are leaks that can happen. There are cracks that can happen. Certainly not on a widespread basis. It would, if you're committing fraud, it's going to be caught on a widespread basis. But to your point, some of these concerns do exist. To online voter registration, our QVF rests behind a firewall and is pretty secure. It is online. Our QVF is accessible online by those who can access it. So the big question is a portal going into that going to be secure? I believe it can be. It's shown to be secure in, again, 38 other states, but solidifying that will be the big question. And I think our Department of Technology and Management and Budget can do that.
Are elections safe? I ask this because going back to 2000, before the Helping Americans Vote Act was implemented, and I might say with help from former Secretary of State Terry Lynn Land, who helped serve on that committee. But before that, Michigan had always touted itself as being a very secure voting place with checks and balances, as you say, decentralized. After the fact, in fact, during some of the recounts in Florida, Secretary of State Candace Miller, I think it was showing us this is how we would have handled this had it happened here, and this wouldn't have happened because we have an automatic plan.
Sure.
Knowing what you know, serving in your capacity with elections, do you feel like that Michigan is secure, particularly in light of some of the concerns that may have arisen in 2016?
I do. 2016 came along and it did show that we had some irregularities. One thing that I've been talking with a couple members on is uncountable precincts. And again, what members of the general public don't know, I guess don't hear about a lot, is that precincts all over, including the 2 counties I represent, precincts can often have a difference between the number of actual ballots in the box and the number that were counted election night. Now, not differing by hundreds, differing by what people could expect, 1, 2, 3. And some of that comes from human error, some of it comes from this or that. But Detroit was really, it had a lot of light shed on it, given the Jill Stein recount and some of the mistakes that happened there. But I will be the first I'll be one to say that those mistakes aren't just limited to Detroit. They happen all over the state. And sometimes it's not the county clerk's fault. It might have been a local error. It might have been a spoiled ballot that just didn't get counted or got counted incorrectly. There are so many things that could happen. But again, on a widespread level, I'm pretty confident about our system. One thing about 2016 that was positive was how quickly our recount process statewide went into action. And really happened very quickly. Many precincts, in fact, I think both my counties before the injunction order was issued by the judge from court, I think both my counties were finished recounting. They did it in a very efficient manner and got it done. So I think there's some, but for the most part, I'm confident in our election system.
So I've got to ask this one more question about elections. We'll move on to some of your other priorities, but one of the other questions that always goes along with that is if we can register to vote electronically,
Sure.
if we can do banking electronically, if we can do all of our finances, from credit cards to paying bills electronically, when will we vote electronically?
I think that is a long ways off, and I will say because when you're talking about registering to vote, you're talking about something that is not all happening millions of times within a small window of time like Election Day. You're talking about registering to vote, and there is in my opinion, there's a 30-day window before an election in which you're not allowed to register for a reason. The state should have that time, if there is any doubt about anything, to clear up what's going on. Are we all good? That's not being very specific. But if voting were online, I could see many ways that could go wrong, just because you're talking about a very short period of time. And I think it would become a hacker's holiday. Now, I'm not an IT guy. I will never claim to be. I think one day we may just get to the point where it's safe, but I think that's a long ways down the road.
What isn't so long is the amount of time that you're going to have to get legislation done. That's where we started this conversation. Sure. What else will you be looking towards? Not maybe, as you point out, not necessarily something that you have, but something that you think the legislature may take up in this next quarter.
Sure. Well, one bill I've had for several weeks now, and we've talked about it, of course, is House Bill 5638, deals with high-capacity water withdrawals. And really, it gets a bad name. Anytime you hear the words high-capacity water withdrawal, so many people will bristle right away. And I understand that. Water is a sensitive matter. Number one, bottled water tends to get tossed into that argument, and that simply goes through another section of code, and so that's not what my bill is dealing with. All I'm trying to solve, and this is what I try and tell people who are on the farmer side, on the other applicant side, or on the environmental protection side, what the problem that exists with the site-specific review process, kind of as a back layer to the Michigan Water Withdrawal Assessment Tool, is that the site-specific review for an applicant is a very open, undefined, can be endless process. And the problem is simple. That takes up a lot of time and a lot of money. And money and time would be fine unless you're talking about over 6 months, and if you're talking about over $50,000 for one well. And then you're talking about a real problem. So I'm very open to working with the opposition, but one thing I'll be looking to do in the weeks ahead is to work with all kinds of stakeholders to say, okay, here's my problem, here's what I'm trying to solve. How can we get there? What can we do to solve the problem that is acceptable to everyone? And boy, isn't that the strategy on every single bill. You try and work with the opposition, try and work to get to a point where everybody's comfortable, but you still solve the problem. And so that's what I look forward to doing in the next few weeks.
In Lansing, expect lawmakers to be back in town on April 10th. We're back with more To the Point. Next week, a look at what the minority in the Senate would like to get done in the coming quarter. Our guest is Senator Jim Ananich. Hope you'll join us Sunday, 10 o'clock, To the Point.